Hey everyone, my name is Ben Consoli. I'm a director and owner of BC Media Productions. This is the Go Creative Show, the show dedicated to creative professionals and filmmakers. Today we wrap up 2019 with colorist Rob Bessette, cinematographer Chris Loughran, and our very own Matt Russell as we discuss the production trends of 2019 and what to expect in 2020. The Go Creative Show is supported by Hedge, Shutterstock, Rule Boston Camera, and Premium Beat. All right, welcome, guys. We have a full house here at Go Creative Show. We're here actually recording at the Podcast Garage, which some of you may know, some of you longtime listeners, that we had our 1 millionth episode, 1 millionth $1 millionth download celebration here at the Podcast Garage. And our very own Rob Bessette was there as well, and he's here again today. But we're psyched to have you guys on today. So we've got a big table here. So let's get everybody introduced. We're going to start with Connor Crosby, who's our producer, and he's going to be on the show talking to us a little bit today as well. So Connor, how are you today?
Hi, guys. So I'm Connor Crosby, the producer of the Go Creative Show. We've been working together about a year now, I think. And so it's my job to find the guests and come up with the questions and edit it all together. So I've had a blast doing it with Ben, and I'm happy to be here.
The show has changed dramatically since Connor's jumped on board. I think it runs more efficiently, and our guests have been really, really good. So we have you to thank. So anybody out there listening and really enjoying the show, you certainly can send your accolades our way to me and Matt, but Connor is behind the scenes doing, pulling a lot of strings and making it all happen. So he's going to be here today as well. And we've got Rob Bessette, colorist here in Boston. And this is your third time on the show. How are you doing today, Rob?
I'm great. You're not sick of me yet?
No.
Yeah?
No, I think
third time.
3 may be the end of it. It depends on how today goes.
Yeah, 3 should probably be the end of it. But no, it's really nice to be here, and I always enjoy talking with you guys, and you put together a great show. Job well done.
Look at that. I paid them to say that. That's how they get on the show. And then we've got Chris Loughran, cinematographer, director of photography, all things camera. And this is your second time on the show, Chris. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I'm Chris Loughran. I'm Ben's DP on most everything Ben produces and directs, and I love working with him and his team.
Look at that.
Drama.
Oh my God. I really, anytime I'm feeling down, I should just have one of these episodes. People can just shower me with compliments. I love it. And of course, Matt Russell, I mean, come on. He's been here since day one, and he's back on the show talking about audio today. Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm in icy central Massachusetts today, so I'm not at the table, but I am home and safe, and glad I could still be on the show one way or another.
Well, it's the end of 2019. It's been a wild year, professionally and personally for me. And from a production standpoint, we've seen a lot. We have certainly seen a lot this year. And I kind of want to start there. Like, what were the trends that we saw in 2019? And we're certainly going to talk about what our predictions are for 2020 as well. But let's start. I'd like to start with Chris, because cinematography is a huge topic we cover a lot on the show, obviously. And I think we've seen some interesting trends this year in 2019 with cinematography from a standpoint of visuals, what we're seeing in TV shows and movies, camera choices. Something I just saw on Facebook, or I think it was Instagram recently, like in the past 2 days, they showed of the Oscar nominated or of the Golden Globe nominated films and TV shows, I think like 11 of them were shot on Alexas or something like Alexa Mini. And then there were still more on other cameras too. It feels like the Alexa is still the camera to beat, even though we're seeing releases from other companies. That still seems to be the gold standard. What are your thoughts on that, Chris?
I feel like I can really only speak, I can speak for us. It's our go-to camera of choice for our commercial work.
Yeah.
Our higher end stuff when we can afford it, and when our clients can afford it. Obviously, we would love to shoot everything on the Alexa, and we've actually talked back and forth about purchasing one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's just a look that everybody agrees is kind of the filmic look that everybody is looking for.
Yeah.
Whether you're shooting TV or corporate, high-end corporate or commercial work, it really has a color space, and obviously resolution is, there's 8K cameras out there. But aside from that, I feel like the look that people are trying to attain just gets delivered by that camera time and again.
Yeah, it really does. It's like the Alexa Mini was the one. I wish I could find that thing. Connor, if you can find it, I think it was on Instagram. It was floating around Facebook, but it was just like a little page about the cameras that are used in the movies. Did you see it? You're nodding your head.
I've seen those in the past. I don't think I've seen one recently, but I remember being surprised that, film was still in there, some nice 35 millimeter stuff, but that Alexa was definitely the king as far as the digital stuff's concerned. And then Red had some stuff kind of hanging out in there, but it was primarily Red, Alexa, and film, really.
I feel like everybody was talking about Red when Netflix just started to, like when they first announced that nothing's going on their air unless it's shot in 4K.
And I love when people use that as a guideline to purchase their camera.
Yeah.
Which I think
Because
is
everything they're shooting is going to go on Netflix.
Yeah, everything is going directly to Netflix. I think it's,
Well, that sort of ushered in, I think people didn't really know, when is 4K going to pass its tipping point? When is it going to be adopted everywhere? When is everyone going to be acquiring in 4K and delivering in 4K? Even though we're still delivering in 2K, but when Netflix made that announcement, that I think is what mobilized everybody. It mobilized the camera manufacturers. It mobilized people like us that are buying stuff for corporate work or commercial work. That was the tipping point, I think. Don't you think? When Netflix said that?
I mean, it definitely played a big role. And in fact, it impacted a huge job that I did this year. I had a job that lasted over 100 days. And the director of photography was a very high-end DP. Really wanted to use Alexa, and he continued to do all his camera tests in Alexa, and he did some other tests with Red. But when push came to shove, the distributor, who will remain unnamed at this point, it was not Netflix, but they said, we need true 4K. And they said, we don't want to blow it up. We don't want to make it bigger. It has to be real 4K resolution. And so the hand was forced. It made them go with the camera that the DP ultimately didn't really want to use. But I mean, when they're, super high-end DPs, every camera looks great. The lighting that they do is just absolutely spectacular. But that was interesting to witness firsthand of someone straight up saying, I want to use the Alexa, and a distributor saying no, because it's not 4K.
That sets an odd precedent. I mean, what do you think about that, Chris? Do you think it's warranted to have a studio saying, no, you have to use this camera? It's not even based on price at that point. It's just based on how much, I guess, media they want.
It's almost a buzzword, honestly. Just to say it's 4K. Cable boxes at home aren't 4K. I have a 4K TV and I can stream Netflix in 4K because they have 4K content, but I'm not watching any sports or any, regular Comcast or whatever you have television. I'm not watching that in 4K. But I will say that when you are watching stuff in 4K, specifically HDR or Dolby Vision or what have you, it does look really nice. But I think that's more of a monitoring thing than a acquisition thing, honestly.
From a cinematographer standpoint, how do you feel about the idea that, now and potentially in the future, the camera choice is going to be impacted by clients?
I think it's fine. It's their video, it's their job, it's their product, it's their money. As somebody who I feel like I can pick up whatever camera I want, use it in manual mode, and deliver the best picture I feel that the camera can deliver, I don't really care what camera it is. I would love to be shooting everything in true 4K, and we shoot in UHD a lot, and then it gets delivered in HD.
Yeah.
Which I know is a benefit for post-production. I shoot a TV show myself that I also edit and direct and deliver to broadcast that gets delivered in 1080i 30. And we shoot in 4K 24p. And if it was, up to me, I would deliver it in 24p. And I'd hand them a ProRes file, as nice as it could look. But sometimes it's stuff's just out of your control.
I guess it's a broader conversation about being familiar with a whole bunch of different tools. Like you can't just say, all I'm going to shoot on, is an Alexa, or all I'm going to shoot on is a Red. You kind of have to be open to it because the choice in camera may not be yours to make.
Correct. Yeah.
But also the cameras are so much better than they were 5 years ago, 2-3 years ago even. Whereas like you had, say, 10 years ago, you said you have one of the first iterations of the Red, or I have an Alexa, or I have a Canon DSLR with a Rec 709 profile baked in, So like there, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm definitely going to use Alexa if I can afford it. Now you've got so much more broader range of footage to choose from, ranging from, like the Blackmagic camera, or the pocket camera, all those stuff it's in the grand scheme of things, dirt cheap, and all the way to the high end, super high end stuff, which is obviously super expensive. But you can get a really good image out of most cameras nowadays, especially if you have someone like yourself who knows what to do with it.
We also saw a lot, Ari put out the Alexa Mini LF. So now we're talking large format in the mini size, which is clearly the winner when it comes to did you find that, by the way? All right. Well, it was something like the most used camera of the films nominated for Golden Globes was the Alexa Mini. So that was the one that had the most films. Only makes sense to go into a large format version of that Mini because the size is just what people want. I have no experience with it. You haven't shot with it yet.
No, not yet.
Do you know anything about it? Like, is there something exciting to you about the idea of large format?
I think large format sensors is kind of not the next wave, but it's kind of the current fad of what people are looking for as a cinematographer. The wider field of view, but also the 4:3 sensor for anamorphic. You can shoot 6K on some of these cameras, anamorphic, full frame. That's a ton of resolution. I don't know how much stuff that you're grading is being delivered that way or shot that way.
A decent amount. I mean, anamorphic is just huge right now.
Yeah,
It's
full frame and
incredibly
anamorphic
popular.
Are the things we're going to just keep seeing more and more of because the lenses are getting cheaper and there's more options as far as camera choices. And that's, cameras keep coming out every 6 months and they're just trying to keep up with fads. And I think that's a big one.
Why do you think anamorphic has become so popular? I mean, the idea of wide screen certainly isn't new. I mean, anamorphic, like you think about old Westerns and stuff, like every old stuff is in these big, huge, wide landscapes like that. Even Breaking Bad, which I don't know if that was shot in anamorphic when it came out, but everyone was talking about the large vistas and how wide and beautiful it is. It feels like no one cared when it was first starting, but now in the age where, people are even doing vertical video, you see vertical video and square video everywhere online, but everybody kind of wants in cinema to be as wide as possible. It's just a weird contrast to me.
Honestly, I think you just said the answer yourself right there. And it almost has to go with the democratization of this process that we're all in, is that everyone, can shoot on their phone or can record anything with almost everything they have. But everyone has, and as corny as it sounds, they say they all want it to look cinematic.
Yeah.
Right. And you say in cinema, everything is normally wide. And it's an incredibly overused adjective. And it's just horribly used, in my opinion, to say, I want this to look cinematic. How many times I come into a color suite and I have someone coming up to me and they hand me their footage and they say, just make it look cinematic. And I'm saying, what? And I feel like I could just put bars on the top and the bottom. They'd be like, amazing. This looks so good. And I feel like that's kind of what has become known as cinematic, is that widescreen look. Whereas if like you're recording, maybe it's just because we see it day to day. If you hold your phone sideways, you record 16:9. So I'm not really sure why that has become such a thing when it's existed for so long. But I feel like more people are aware of it now, just because in the past they haven't been. But
I think it's something that's in the film industry is kind of a standard. Any big blockbuster movie, of the past 50 years has probably been shot anamorphic. And then the kind of rebirth of IMAX and large format cameras moving that into the digital space is something that's always been super expensive to do from the hobbyist point of view or the low budget point of view. And once the democratization, gets out there, or is available, it's just something that's different, and it's not always necessarily the right thing for the project.
What does it actually do? I mean, I know it sounds like an insane question, but I understand, like I'm thinking to myself, okay, anamorphic, it's widescreen, whatever, but what does it do optically? Does the lens bend in a different way? Does it distort faces in a different way? Is there something about an anamorphic, I guess, de-squeeze, right? When you have to de-squeeze that image, that gives the look something even beyond just being wider.
So it takes the widescreen image, squeezes it into a square sensor or film plane, and then in post is stretched back out to get a much wider field of view.
Why are you able to get a wider field of view if you're squeezing, like?
Because you're... I can use my hands.
I know.
But
well, just use your hands. People can't. The audience is smarter than I am anyway, so they can figure it out. This is just for me.
So you're taking a wider image that you can't fit into a 16:9 frame.
Yeah.
And you're squeezing it into a square frame and then stretching it back out even wider than what could fit in that 16:9 frame.
Huh. So is your like what am I saying? So but you're still are you still delivering it in 16:9?
It would be letterboxed if it was delivered in 16:9.
Your acquisition is distorted basically, and then you're stretching it out.
Does it do anything to like faces or objects? Does it change the size of anything?
Squishes everything slightly vertically. So everything gets squished down to the middle.
Huh. That I would love to see it. I'm sure there's something out there. Like a side-by-side comparison.
Ryan Connolly just did a really good lens test for his last film that you could really see the difference.
Yeah, I remember talking to him about
between
his
full
decision
frame
to... I didn't...
and
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to check that out because I'm pretty sure he talked about some anamorphic stuff and the decision to do it and why.
There are a lot of references online. You can check it out.
I want to jump to audio a little bit and get Matt into this conversation because we were just talking about how, perhaps people are excited about anamorphic because they can't just do it on their own. And now we've got these super sophisticated cameras in our phones. One thing they definitely can't do with a phone is acquire and mix good audio. And I feel like audio is such an important part of what we're seeing, strangely enough. If the audio is bad, it's shit. Like you don't want to watch something when the audio is terrible.
And why is it always the first thing to be cut from production?
Tell me about it.
And always the first thing to be cut from post-production.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good discussion to have. So Matt, come on in. Talk to me about what have you been seeing in 2019 for audio trends?
Well, a couple of things. I spend a good deal of time. I think a bunch of people know that listen to the show I've been on before, know that I do several things. Post and composing music are just two components. And I spend a lot of time on the system side of audio. So I do a lot of RF coordination work and system design and building and commissioning of systems, sound systems, that is. One thing that's definitely going on right now that's incredibly difficult for those working in the field is you've probably seen some ads recently that T-Mobile's running talking about 5G and 600 megahertz.
Yeah.
Well, that was a trend that started back in roughly 2006, 7, 8, when the FCC decided to make room for 4G phones in the 700 megahertz range. And a few years ago, they decided that in order to make room for 5G phones, they needed to make room in the 600 megahertz part of the spectrum. And in doing so, digital television stations across the United States have had to move their broadcast frequencies. They're compacting, and they've essentially swallowed up another 100 megahertz of the UHF spectrum. That's making life difficult for those who work in production, live sound, whether you're doing the Grammys or you're shooting a film and you're using wireless, or you're working at a university, which I did for 16 years.
Why is it making it difficult?
Because you have less UHF spectrum to work in. Essentially, you've removed another huge chunk of operating range. And this is being done over phases, over the course of roughly 2 years. It started this time in the fall of 2018. We're at stage 7, or phase 7, as they call it, and that will wrap up on the 17th of January. In the Boston area, to give you a good example as to what's going on here, a couple of major stations have moved. The next big one is WHDH. They're the largest affiliate, a 1 million watt station. They used to be, I believe, NBC, right? Is that right, guys? They were Channel 7 was the NBC affiliate.
HDH?
Yeah.
Yeah, or I think so.
Yeah, they were Channel 7.
Channel 7, yeah. So now they're an independent, but they're a 1,000 kilowatt station. They're moving from channel TV 42, which is actually, just to give you an example of what's going on, operates at a center frequency of 641 megahertz, and they're moving to TV 35, which will give them a center frequency of 599. Now, this sounds like I'm nerding, but when you're doing this all over the country over the course of 10 phases that take place between September of 18 and May of, or really it'll be over in July of 2020, and most of the 600 megahertz range will be gone, a lot of people have to look at the equipment they're using, look at the cities where they're going to be traveling, look at the city where they're going to be operating the most. For you guys, it would be Boston, and make sure that you have equipment that's not going to be stepped on by cell phones or by TV 1 million watt stations that will just clobber your wireless mics in a given metro.
Yeah, I remember it wasn't that long ago where I had to change all my wireless mics because I was no longer able to use the frequency I was using. I don't remember what the situation was, but it's interesting to hear that a decision like bringing in 5G into a city affects video production like that.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and it's really because of the way UHF frequencies work. And so they want to use it too. The telecoms want to use it too. It works very well for the most part. And so now there's a moment here where production companies and rental houses and universities, where I was at MIT for 16 years. We had 40 channels when I started there, and we ended with about 650. So I was managing those the whole time. And so when you have that many wireless microphones operating in a small geographic location, you have to really plan carefully. Not as much with digital wireless microphones now as you did with analog systems. You've got a lot more freedom now, just by the way they work, but you still have to do careful planning. And so there's a Shure website that's dedicated to it. And just so being totally transparent, I work for the Shure rep now. I started that job in March. I left MIT. But Shure has a lot of good resources that you can look at to figure out what's going on in your city and where you're traveling. So
that's a great resource.
Now, Chris, you're not like a dedicated audio person, but you have tons of audio gear. So
Right.
Are you concerned about this? Did you even know about this?
I did, yeah. We switched over all of our wireless lavs to the 400, 500 megahertz range probably a year and a half or 2 years ago.
In anticipation of 5G?
I just knew that the 600 range was going away,
Okay.
and it was going to be either illegal or unavailable.
both
Okay.
soon. Yeah, both soon. So
I mean,
it'll be-
they'll still work for now, I think, but
at the end of 2020, it'll be illegal to operate. And whether it's legal or illegal, Ben, we always talk about rules saying about it. You always talk about it, about production being mission critical.
Yeah.
You just don't want to be on set and be wrestling with wireless mic frequencies. It's just, there's no time for that.
No,
So
absolutely not.
You got to plan ahead. You got to definitely take a look at where you're going. Cities like Boston, New York, Chicago, Dallas is one of the worst in the country, believe it or not. Just the sheer number of TV channels. And they're all now moved into that, 470 to, 603 sort of range. So you have to kind of know the rules of the game and plan ahead. So I
and
highly recommend
scan your lavs for channels for good channels.
And there's products too that you can carry with you that are inexpensive. You know, I'll plug one of them that I carry with me everywhere I go. It's by a company called RF Venue, and they make a portable wireless frequency device that has a screen on it. It's $500. It's called the RF Explorer. I highly recommend it. And they actually make software that will track, sort of like turn all that data into CSVs. You can look at it on their software, but I also highly recommend using Sure's Wireless Workbench software. Wireless Workbench can tell you pretty much everything that's going on in a given area. Now they're updating the zip code data. They pull that zip code data from the FCC, and the FCC has not honestly done a very good job of keeping track of everything in terms of their databases. They know what's going on, but the databases aren't entirely accurate. So as Shure is getting new data from them, you'd actually be able to enter in a zip code in Workbench, choose your manufacturer. It doesn't have to be Shure. And then choose how many channels of a given product specifically you need to be able to operate, and it will kick out frequencies for you. And it's a free piece of software. And just to circle back on this, I might be going a little fast. The RF Venue product has its own software that you have to use with their scanning tools. But that software will export a CSV that you can then import into Workbench to do all your modeling. So you can kind of see what's going on in any area that you're operating in, and then choose your manufacturer and product. And then it will actually tell you what frequencies to use, not only based on the FCC data, which only tells you DTV information, but any other wireless microphones that may be operating in that area or other devices. So I do spend a fair amount of my time working on this, and specifically in New England and upstate New York. And it's something to be concerned about. So plan ahead, I guess, is my word of advice. It's only going to get worse.
Send us a link, Matt, to that resource on Shure, and we'll put a link to it in the website.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to talk a little bit about creatively, where we're seeing, what we saw in 2019 as far as audio mixing goes and all that. But before we get there, real quick, our ads are going to be a little bit different in this episode because we have limited time here at the Podcast Garage, but it's still very important to let people know about Hedge. Hedge is a backup software for filmmakers, which we all use. I mean, our media is the most important thing that we do. I mean, anything you do, it all comes down to media. And you don't want to just be dragging media files all over your Finder. That's an insane way to do it. I use Hedge. It's a backup software for filmmakers. It's super easy. You can import multiple sources and send it to multiple destinations at the same time. So it's perfect for creating multiple backups on set, which is what I always want to do. I also have the Hedge Connect app for my phone, so when the transfer is done, I get a notification on my phone, and I go about my business. It's peace of mind. Media is it. I got camera operators and audio people and behind-the-scenes photographers. I want to make sure that all that media is backed up correctly, so that is why I use Hedge, and you should too. Visit hedge.video/Go Creative Show. You get 20% off the full license. And there's many other licenses for you to enjoy there too. Hedge.video/Go Creative Show. So let's talk a little bit about the trends in audio from a creative standpoint. What have you been hearing? I mean, obviously, a ton of great projects are coming into theaters, but even more so, TV. I mean, we're watching movies now, award-winning and award-nominated movies are being released on streaming services. Does that change the way that people like you mix? Is mixing for TV, mixing for phones, mixing for iPads, how does that impact your, the way that you put together your sounds and your effects?
Well, it's definitely the number of complaints I think that people had in recent years about your television experience at home is so different than your experience in a great theater. I just saw the latest Star Wars film in a Dolby Atmos theater. And
the Dolby Atmos theaters are so nice.
It was.
You haven't gone to one, Chris?
No.
Oh my God.
It's a great experience.
The audio is amazing. It looks great
It's
too.
not just super loud.
It was loud,
It is
but
loud.
it was really clear
Yes.
and really fun too, as things are flying above your head and you're hearing it all over the room, and it was fun. But the experience is so different when you're at home because the dynamic range becomes kind of a problem, the cinematic dynamic range. When the dialogue is really, really quiet during sort of the lulls of the film where it's talky talk and not, explosions and things happening. And that if you want to make something hit you hard and feel an effect from it, then the things that lead up to it can't be really loud. So if you make those things quiet, then that dynamic range, when that big object comes racing over your head and then goes down and crashes into the ground and makes a huge boom, has a much more, it's much more effective to do it by having it be quieter in front of that than it would be everything's just loud. But our experience at home can be really, really different. So over the years, people have complained the dialogue's too quiet and they're reaching for their remote to adjust the volume too much. And this year, I finally started to see a trend in the series, both the cinematic-ish series that are happening on Amazon and Netflix, as well as their films, where they've adjusted things a bit, where the dynamic range has gotten a little bit tighter so that you can actually hear the dialogue without reaching for your remote. And that's a relief for me because I'm a stickler about it. I don't need a big dynamic range at home. The booms don't have to have, 12 double 21 subwoofers across my living room. I need to be able to hear the dialogue first. So it was nice to not feel like I was, yelling at the TV more than I was listening to it. And I think that trend will continue. I think that the networks have listened and they're paying attention to what users and their customers really want. So it's definitely a trend in the right direction as far as I'm concerned. And then as far as mixing for devices, that's another one where dynamic range really, you can't have too much. It's like a podcast. You don't want a huge dynamic range on one because people are listening in their cars and on the train and while they're doing other things. And I just wrapped up a show that I was working on for 2 years that was going to YouTube every week. That series has come to an end. And Rob, I think you worked on it at the beginning, the Lego show, and I can now kind of talk about it.
Yep, I did the first season on that one.
Yeah, and I did seasons 2 through 4. So we've the last episode, I believe, has aired, and I've got clearance to finally talk about it. I've sort of hinted around it for a couple of years here on Co-Creative Show.
And this was a web series just for online. That was the distribution.
It strictly went to it was a Lego show. It strictly went to YouTube every week. And it was sort of a fundamental understanding that there'd be very little dynamic range. You still want the sound effects to kind of pop a little. It wasn't completely square waved, but it was definitely, geared to be a little bit chaotic from start to finish. And again, we know it's a show for adults too, but it was really geared towards, 11 to 16-year-olds. And if you can't hear the dialogue at any moment, you lose them quickly.
Yeah.
So it was definitely meant to be loud, but I think that's just the way phones and computer devices should sound.
We also saw that in the music industry when MP3s came in. Like once MP3s started coming in, all dynamic range went away because
it was the
you had
dynamic,
to, that's it. Everything had to be loud. It was the loudness wars.
The loudness wars,
yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And that feels like that's over too. That it's the wrong way to say it, but I feel like art has kind of come back in a way where we're not just trying to rail everything into your inner ear. We're leaving room for dynamic range and using it as a tool. So
what's so weird is do you guys know who Billie Eilish is? All right.
Oh yeah.
So she's sort of ushered in this new genre of that like very quiet, but the voice is very present. It's right in your face, but it's super quiet and very like low key. She's certainly not yelling and screaming into the mic, but that trend in music reminds me of when cinematography started getting darker and darker. It's like music was so compressed and it was loudness wars and you had no dynamic range. But now all of a sudden people are experimenting with the higher highs and the lower lows in audio. Certainly in cinematography too. But I'm seeing that in audio more. Are you seeing the same thing?
100%. Yeah, 100%. I think it's also a thing you mentioned, dark sounding, and everything cinematically has gone dark. I mean, it over the last say 7 years, we've watched, a trend starting probably with Breaking Bad and a lot of shots that were not overly dark, but probably perceived as darker than other things that were on the air at the time.
Yeah.
And that went into, House of Cards and all kinds of things. And I don't know that, I don't want to take credit away or give too much credit to that show, but that was the first one where I started to really notice that things were, a number of shows that followed it had a darker and darker look, and music and sound are kind of doing the same thing. I mean, to a certain extent, we don't need everything to be ultra bright sonically anymore. And certainly you're not seeing too many bright shows even now.
Well, let's talk about color, since we're kind of talking now about the visuals of things. What was the trend that you saw, Rob, this year? Or what trends did you see this year? I mean, are we on the right track? Are we all noticing something that actually exists with things getting a little bit darker?
Oh, yeah, I would definitely say so. In the last couple of years, I'd say it's been pointing in that direction. As we kind of hit on earlier, like the anamorphic, like distortion that you get in images, that's pretty popular. And then, as corny as to say it, that teal and orange, like it still works, and people really like it, and it's pleasing to the eye, and it works for a reason. Teal and orange are complementary colors. One makes the other one look better, and the orange is generally the skin tone. So that skin tone color is complemented against a bluish teal, which in turn makes you look better. If you put like an orange next to a green, generally it's not as nice. They're not complementary colors. But in terms of darkness, yeah, I definitely say that we're doing a lot of stuff darker, and I applaud that. I wouldn't say do it for the sake of doing it, but if it benefits the story and it looks more cinematic, air quotes, a lot of times darker works. And I think ultimately what it's doing is that we have a really nice dynamic range that's captured in an image, and we're able to push that to one extreme or the other more. And people are more accepting of that, where in the past, everyone used to be afraid of, it's dark, I can't see. But in reality, if you're just walking around your house at night, you don't have lights on, some stuff you can't see. If it's a horror movie or something that's moody or taking place at night, you don't see every inch. You don't see every detail. That's not reality. And I think that's translating over to film and television now. And in reality, I think people were kind of just afraid of it. And I'd still see it some, specifically in commercials, where people are afraid to not let a product look as pristine as it possibly can.
Yeah.
Right? Like your Coke can has to be your super bright red, and it has to look on brand, and the light on it has to be just exquisite, and it has to sparkle and shine. And I will say, that does exist. And I do see some shifting away from that, but for the most part, I'd say in commercials, that's still prevalent, having that really, really beautiful product shot. But in cinematography and in film and television more so, dark definitely is more prevalent. And one specific episode that I recall was the Game of Thrones one, that everyone was complaining about being way too dark. And I don't think that was an issue of the grade. I think that was an issue of monitoring. I think that was captured beautifully and graded beautifully, but was fell victim to the streaming or the compression that exists when broadcasting that, and also people's televisions. So if you have, I have no doubt that when you're watching that show in the grading suite, or you've got the highest end television and you're streaming it on a perfectly solid network, that looks beautiful. However, if you're, viewing it on a tablet or a device or what have you, and your connection keeps getting interrupted, or it's getting compressed all to hell, it's not going to look great. And you're not going to see the White Walkers, charging the castle. And I think that was a really interesting way to see this dark cinematography, unfortunately, in my opinion, shed in a bad light. When in reality, I don't think it's any fault of the filmmakers, cinematographers, or colorists.
Do you worry about where the projects that you work on are being seen?
I do.
Yeah, I do. I shouldn't, but I do. Because
why do you say you shouldn't? I mean,
because
feel
I
like
can't control it.
I worry about what I can't control all the time.
I can't control if someone's watching it, while going to the bathroom, or if someone's watching it while they're in a hospital waiting room, or if they're watching it in their living room in a perfect environment. In a color suite, you have a controlled environment, and it's set up that way. You're perfectly calibrated. You're supposed to see the image as pristine as it can be in its truest nature. And in reality, that's all that you can control. Once it goes out to the wild, and I'm sure Matt can attest to this as well, you can't control how anyone sees it, views it, or listens to it.
Yeah, you can put some parameters around it. I want to go for this, or I want to go for that. But as I sit here in my room, I too am listening. Right now I'm on headphones, but my monitors are calibrated and they're expensive and they sound amazing. And I know that probably no one else but me will listen to my mixes on something like this. It's not a consumer product in any way, shape, or form. Maybe some other mix engineer somewhere sits there and listens to the show, or some studios playing it back or watching a commercial. But for the most part, I have to do just the best job I can do and listen to it on the best speakers I can afford, and know that, yeah, okay, I'm targeting this audience, but that doesn't mean that that's who's going to watch it or listen to it.
I don't worry about it too much, only because no matter what they're looking at it on, they're looking at it on something that they are familiar with. So like they already have a reference point. That it's sort of like the old thing about, when doing music, you always want to listen to it in your car radio. Like no matter what, because that's your car radio. Like what to expect from that speaker system. And I feel like if someone's just watching it on their phone or their computer the way they watch everything else, at least it's not going to stand out as being odd,
Yeah, you have to get it to translate. You definitely have to do your job and make sure it translates, but it doesn't. I don't expect them to hear or see every detail that you guys see or I hear. I want to get those details right so that I know I did my job. But that's about as far as I can really go.
The funny thing about it is that a lot of time people don't even know there's a difference unless there's a reference point to check that difference against.
Yeah,
that's right.
So if you have one of my most powerful tools in a color suite is the on and off switch. So I can say, here's my grade, and then this is the change I made, and I can turn it on and off, and people can instantly see what the change is. Whereas if I had one grade in one room and the same grade just partially different in a different room, and you walked from room A to room B, you wouldn't be able to tell a difference. Me neither. I wouldn't be able to tell a difference either. But when you have that, little toggle, I'm talking just changing, 5-10%, something that's not minor and, or that's relatively minor. And then if you have that reference point, it makes a really big difference. And the average viewer or listener doesn't have that.
This really kicks in when you guys do rough mixes and you send that off to the client. Like for me, it's, if you make them pretty rough, then all of a sudden I look like a rock star because my mix was actually mixed, and that they see what they're paying for. They hear what they're paying for.
I want to talk about on-set monitoring because, obviously everybody's monitoring on set, but what I've seen and heard a lot in this past year on Go Creative Show is cinematographers, directors of photography making custom LUTs for on-set purposes. And that's not something that I've ever done. I don't know if you have, Chris, but I'm hearing more about that now. I guess we'll start with you, Chris. Like, is that something that you're doing? And if not, is it something you're hoping to do in the future? And what's the benefit of it?
We're not doing it. And I think our work is going through such a pipeline that when it gets into Rob's hands, or it gets into Matt's hands, it's so different than, it's usually so much different than what we were looking at on set.
Yeah.
We're also looking at 3 or 4 or 5 different monitors, whether it's my Panasonic monitor or you're bringing a Atmos on set now.
Yeah.
And people are watching things on their iPads. We're not doing it. We could be doing it if we brought Rob on to every shoot, which I'm sure he would love.
Are you seeing more of that, Rob? Are people asking for?
Not for commercials.
We're also sorry to cut you off.
No, it's fine.
We're a lot of our stuff is going pretty close to Rec 709 We're not giving something a super dark, specific look. So I think coming up with like a custom LUT for like our nighttime scene is not really necessary.
Yeah, I'd say I'd agree with that. I can think of one job that I've done with you guys in the past year or so that was incredibly aggressive. I'm blanking.
Extreme. Was it extreme? The TVs.
That one, but also the one that had like the drill sergeant that was supposed to be like 70s filmic kind of thing. Like that whole thing, like we could have made it look, 709, but we went super aggressive. Like, so that is something that probably could have benefited from a custom LUT being made and something like that. But again, that was something where we were kind of exploring. We weren't quite sure what we wanted. You were able to capture enough dynamic range to make sure we could get what we wanted. But, and that's the thing with doing those is that you kind of have to have an idea as to what you want to do.
Yeah, I would say that's more about pre-production and the creative direction than the cinematography. You know what I mean? If you're trying to emulate a look and your client needs to know it's going to look like that on set, then that's really important. Once you get to know your equipment, though, like I know that when I look through the viewfinder, it's going to look like something, and I can look at the waveform, and I know if my exposure is safe. When I look at my small HD monitor, which has like 8 stops of dynamic range, and then you come over my shoulder and you say, "Is it blown out there?" And I'm like, "No, trust me."
Yeah.
Because I've spent all day looking at the waveform. So when it goes to another monitor, I'm not super concerned. As long as the client is happy with what they're looking at, and I know it's not overexposed, I know it's exposed correctly, then I'm fine. Well, and I think you are too. I mean, you seem to trust the pipeline. So
I trust the pipeline because I know I've seen where Rob has taken stuff that I feel like even if we don't see it on set, it doesn't bother me because I don't feel like I need to necessarily illustrate exactly what I'm looking for on set to clients because I know we can do it afterwards. They've seen reference images. They're on board with that anyway. Plus, like you said, the most powerful tool is the on-off switch. We can try it, and if they hate it, you shut it off. So I feel like I don't necessarily think for the work we're doing, we have to have it. That said, it's not like we're doing these multi-day, large 15-episode storylines. We're making a 30-second commercial or something. So the consistency between days isn't as important. We just have more flexibility in post, I think.
We're typically shooting one scene.
Yeah, exactly. So for us, but it seems like people are talking about it more and more.
It's really unusual for it not to happen on a movie or a television show or something streaming, something that's, as you said, multiple days. And a lot of that.
Can I cut you off one time?
Yeah, go ahead.
We also generally have our editor or a director who's supervising the edit on set.
Yeah. So
it's not going to go to somebody 2 months from now for post-production, and then 2 months from now it's going to go to another person for post-production. There doesn't need to be that consistency throughout the pipeline because you already know what's going to happen to it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. What were you saying, Rob?
No, I'd just say more so than ever before, the pre-pro part is tied into the post part. So, for example, if I'm working on a television show or a movie or what have you, that LUT is generally developed by, if I'm the finishing colorist, then I will generally develop the LUT. And we do it for the particular type of lighting that might be had, say it's tungsten or daylight or whatever, sodium. Or sometimes there's just one show LUT, which is just everything falls onto this blanket of this look. And I've worked on shows that have as little as one LUT, and I've worked on shows that have had as many as 10. And they're always slated, or they're marked on the slate as to which one you use for that particular shot. And and then the cinematographer has to be aware of what's going on, and that has to be monitored properly for the given scene. And then essentially you work before the LUT and you tweak and change the image as before it goes into the LUT. And then the LUT is essentially just dumb math, right? It says make pixel A look like pixel B. And however those are customly built, whether the reds are compressed or the shadows are lifted or the highlights roll off a specific way, that's specific to that particular film or show. Sometimes they're super aggressive, and then other times they're relatively vanilla. It all depends on kind of what you want your final result to be. But I rarely see it in commercials, and I almost always see it in film and television.
Let's take a quick break and talk about Rule Boston Camera. Rule is the place to go to purchase and rent all of your production equipment, and you'll want to, because production is mission critical. Think about it. You are spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to make sure that your production goes off without a hitch. And you want to make sure that the equipment that you're renting is of the best quality possible and taken care of well, and that you know how to use it. Now, you're going to get all of those things at Rule Boston Camera because they've been around for nearly 40 years. Whenever big, huge productions from Hollywood come into town, they use Rule, and that's why we do too. With Rule, you're going to get expert advice and counsel in pre-production and technical guidance when you take the equipment out for your shoot. So they are committed to support you no matter what. If you have their equipment on your set, they are supporting you. It's a production partner. And really what it is peace of mind. So we're talking about a world-class inventory of rental gear, cameras, audio, lighting, grip, communications, but pair that with the professional know-how and the technical guidance and the support that you want in a production partner. And that's what Rule Boston Camera is. So check them out for yourself at rule.com, RULE.com. You are listening to the Premium Beat Song of the Week. This one is called Growing by Arenas. Premium Beat is where to go for all of your royalty-free music and sound effects. When you visit premiumbeat.com, you have access to a collection of thousands of royalty-free tracks for as low as $49 each. And most of the songs give you way more than just the individual track. You get cut downs and loop sets and stems. What that really means is customization, so you can take the track that you loved and make it fit into your project perfectly. But what it really comes down to is quality, and that's what you're going to get at premiumbeat.com. Great songs recorded really well and all the customization you need. premiumbeat.com. And lastly, let's talk about Shutterstock.com. Now, Shutterstock has millions upon millions of photos, videos, music tracks. Like, it's just endless what they have there at Shutterstock.com. But what I really think Shutterstock excels at is inspiration. Yeah. I go there so many times. Sometimes when you're editing a project, you kind of have like a writer's block sort of thing. You just don't know the right clip to put. You need to see something different than the media that you've been looking at for hours. You just need like a refresher. And I go to Shutterstock many, many times for that. They've got great information and advice and lessons in their blog, but they also have masterfully curated collections, which is where I like to start, in a whole bunch of different categories. So, generally I don't just go and put something in the search bar, although you certainly can. I like to start at the collections, because then at least I'm in kind of the ballpark. I'm in a category that I'm looking at. And they put together such great collections that you've kind of already begun your journey before you even really dive in. So it's a great starting point. Now, of course, you go to Shutterstock.com for royalty-free images and videos and music, but I think you should also go there to learn at their blog and for inspiration. So check it out for yourself, Shutterstock.com. In our last couple of minutes, let's talk about 2020. What do we see as, being the next big thing for next year? I want to start with audio. Matt, what are you thinking? Where do you think audio is going to go in 2020? I mean, we have NAB around the corner. CES is basically like a week away. All of those sort of benchmark events that, set the tone for the new year are happening very soon. What are you seeing?
Well, definitely in terms of circling back to RF, manufacturers are utilizing digital almost completely at this point, and they're trying to use as much of the UHF spectrum that's available as possible in a given receiver. not to plug Shure again, but they've had a product on the market. They saw this coming called Axient Digital. They don't make a portable right now, so that's definitely something to be concerned about for them. But in other things more related to post, I would say that Isotope is kind of leading the way with machine learning-based products. So things like Neutron and RX and Ozone are using machine learning to make novices sound better and make the pros' jobs easier. So in an RX 1 second sample, they illustrate, and I'll put a link to this too, that upwards to 100,000 decisions need to be made on how to correct something. And what better way to do that than with machine learning? And I think there's going to be more and more of those products, not only from Isotope. I can't imagine that that's a trend that they're going to slow down with, but more and more of those types of products will work their way into post and other aspects of audio in general where, why not? When that technology is increasingly being made more available and easier to use, and there's platforms for it, it's going to make my job a lot easier. And I use it. There's no doubt. I use the assistant tools all the time where I could get in there and just start knuckling with each of the individual components. Why not use an assistant that might tackle 10 different RX modules at once and see what it does? And often it works very well. So that's something I know is going to continue. And last thing I'll say, not to take up too much time, is I just bought sort of self-calibrating monitors. These types of monitors been on the market for a long time, but I can't imagine that more and more companies are going to do this with Genelec and even Fulcrum Acoustic kind of leading the way. But Genelec does it. They do it in a very special way. And
they calibrate to the room they're in?
Yeah. And it stores the FIR filters in the speakers themselves once the calibration is done. And I've wanted a pair of these in particular for many years, and I'm happy to have them. And I can't imagine that other manufacturers aren't going to do that. I mean, it really takes a lot of mystery out of what's going on in your room and how to make the monitors sound as good as they can in that given space. So I think you'll see more of that.
I love that. Chris, thoughts, cinematography, cameras, where are we going in 2020?
I think camera-wise, we're still going to see a big jump in full-frame cameras that are getting smaller and smaller. Like, I think Panasonic has one that shoots 6K, 4x3, full frame, and anamorphic with like steady shot built in.
Is that the S1H that they just said in November?
It still has some major issues, but it's pretty impressive for the size and the cost and everything. Anamorphic lenses are going to get cheaper. So I think in the low budget stuff, we're going to start to see a lot more of that just because people can, not because they should. And I think LED lighting just keeps getting better and better and better with Aries' new orbiter light that's coming out. It's pretty incredible and pretty impressive. And hopefully things just start to shift in that direction where we're going from big LED panels to single source LED lights.
More controllable LED.
More controllable LED and reliable.
Absolutely. We didn't even get a chance to talk about lighting. There's so much to discuss, but it is what it is. Rob, color grading, color science, the look of things. Where are we going in 2020?
Well, for anyone who's worked with Resolve knows that they're constantly changing their product. And in my opinion, sometimes not in a good way. The color part of it has...
You haven't started editing yet?
Not yet. Or visual effects or audio. The color side of it stayed really solid. And it's amazing. It's really, really good. And I just hope that, that integration of color and visual effects, the line is getting more and more blurred. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. However, I don't want to have to focus on something that isn't necessarily color, and where I spend a half an hour, 45 minutes on a shot where it kind of is at a sacrifice of what my overall look should be. So I feel like that's going to continue to be developed whether you want it or not, because ultimately what Blackmagic is trying to do is they're trying to make an all-in-one toolkit, and I applaud them for that. What they've done is frankly amazing, especially for the price point. But probably the biggest thing that I think will be is HDR monitoring. That hasn't really hit much of here in Boston. But I know, there's been a lot of movies that are being refinished in HDR, and that's not a color thing. That's a monitoring thing. I mean, you have to color it, yes, too, but we physically, in the past, the data has always been there. We just physically haven't been able to see it because the technology of the monitor didn't exist, and it does now. And hopefully that becomes more mainstream because I think it looks really awesome.
What a year 2019 has been. We've had some absolutely amazing guests, incredible conversations, wonderful opportunities like hosting an entire week of events for Atomos at NAB. We brought on a producer, Connor Crosby. The show is growing by leaps and bounds, and we have all of you guys to thank. Now, we've got so many new surprises in store for 2020, and you guys are going to absolutely love it. So continue to follow us on social media, at Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can catch up with what's going on with the show. We give you an opportunity to ask your questions to our upcoming guests. And of course, I also want to thank Matt Russell for mixing and mastering and making the show sound so good, Connor Crosby for producing the show, and all of you for listening. And of course, our sponsors, Rule Boston Camera, Hedge, Premium Beat, and Shutterstock. Without these people, the show would not exist. So please support those that support us, and we will see you in 2020.